You've eaten Gotham's wealth, its spirit, but your feast is nearly over.
This isn't a blood hole. It's an operating table. And I'm the surgeon. Why aren't you laughing?
From this moment on, none of you are safe.
All right, welcome to the Batman Book Club, episode 236. You see it in the title. I'm your host, Ryan Lauer. With me, this is a very special episode, of course. It's a big one. We got a big one here because the legendary writer of Batman himself, Steve Englehart, is here. Steve, thanks for agreeing to sit down and talk to me here for a little bit.
I'm good.
You're good? All right.
Yeah.
Before I ask anybody who comes on here for the first time, what is your favorite Batman story?
That I didn't write.
Let's go that, and then we can get into the favorite one you wrote.
All right. I mean, obviously I like my own stuff.
Of
Uh,
course.
um, I would have to go actually with pretty much anything that Dick Sprang drew
Big Sprang.
back in the day.
Hmm.
Um, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, it was the 50s, and all there was for superheroes was Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Martian Manhunter.
Yeah.
Maybe Aquaman. I don't know. But anyway, the only one of those that I actually liked was Batman. And that was, I mean, I liked him in general, but I particularly liked Dick Sprang's artwork. And
Hmm.
so um, when I first got sucked into Batman, that was what sucked me in.
Hmm.
So there's been a lot of good stuff, obviously, since then. But I mean, I just love Dick Sprang's
Yeah,
artwork.
that's great. Yeah, it's very, as I've talked to some artists on here before too. I imagine I can't draw to save my life, but I'd imagine for an artist, a goal is when somebody sees their work, someone knows, oh, that's Dick Sprang. And I feel like
Yeah.
that is the legacy of Dick Sprang. You know it when you see it of who it
Right.
is.
And there was nobody else like that,
Hmm.
with those perspectives and all that stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
the rest of the Batman art was pretty pedestrian
Yeah,
and I mean, Carmine Infantino's Batman
sure.
when with the new look in 64, I mean, that stuff was great. Carmine was always great. Neil Adams, of course. I'm in this business because I loved Neil Adams.
Yeah.
But favorite actual story,
Yeah.
I hone in on Dick Sprang
On Dick
visuals.
Spring. I think he's
Yeah.
going to come up in the conversation in at least one question I have for you here in a second. But definitely one. I'm looking you up. I saw that it says you were born in Indianapolis.
Yeah.
You are a Hoosier. Well, sir, right now I am 2 hours north of Indianapolis. I'm a lifelong Hoosier myself.
Were you
Uh,
in Fort Wayne?
yes, sir. Good. Yeah.
Okay.
Look at
Okay.
that. How long were you in Indiana growing up?
Just 5 years.
About 5 years.
I was born in Indianapolis. My father was a reporter for the Louisville Courier. Well, at the time, he was a reporter for the Dayton Daily News. And so I
Oh.
lived the first 3 years in Dayton. Then he joined the Louisville Courier Journal. So we moved down there,
Hmm.
and I was there from age 3 to 13. And then he became the Indiana bureau chief, and we moved to Indianapolis. So we were living in Indianapolis, and I was born in Indianapolis, but I only spent like my high school years
Oh
in
yeah.
in Indianapolis, and then I went to college, and that was that.
Do you ever make your way back? Not that there's
Yeah,
massive headline reasons outside of some sports, but I don't know if you come back to Indiana that often.
not so much anymore. I
Mm,
mean, my sister still lives there. My father did live there,
gotcha. Hmm.
before he passed. So I mean, I would come back once a year, kind of thing. But I am now in California, which is
Yeah.
2,500 miles, 2,000 miles, whatever it is.
Just a little
It's
bit.
yeah, so it's not like I'm dropping over for the weekend necessarily.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Yeah.
I understand that. So I'm sure you've given your origin story when it comes to comics and everything. And I'm gonna, zone in on Batman work. And I mean, I usually go, linear, sequential, but we'll hop all over the place. But before we get into your, definitive run there on Detective Comics, you did Night of the Stalker.
All right.
And that is a story that many people love, rightfully so. I love that story. And what was for a comic where that was your first time writing Batman in a comic
Yeah,
book?
I think so. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you, and I apologize because I'm also asking of things long time ago and exactly what day was it and what words did you first write down? But
Yeah.
what was that like for a story of first time writing Batman, but he doesn't say anything?
Well, there's a couple things there. One, it was the idea of Sal Amendola, a
Hmm.
young artist, did the art on that story. Obviously, he was a good artist, but he didn't really stick around in comics. But he, and I think it was his brother and Neil Adams, sort of worked out what the story was going to be,
Hmm.
and Sal drew it, and then they came to me to dialogue it. So I was just a hired hand in that regard, right? Sal and I were friends. I had worked with Neil, so there were the connections. But I mean, they chose me to dialogue it, and the concept was Batman never says anything.
Hmm.
Being an idiot, I wrote some dialogue. I wrote some dialogue for Batman along the way, and Archie Goodwin, who was the editor, took it out again. So that's why he was a legendary editor. Um, so yeah, I just put words to the story that already existed,
Hmm.
too many words. And um, I mean, it was the whole thing. It was everything that was good about it was there before I got there. You know what I'm
Hmm.
saying? So um, I too like that story, and I know many people do.
Yeah.
You, I get the least amount of credit for that.
Yeah, I mean, you still. I mean, one line especially that I highlight here, and I mean, it's written on the page, so it's credit all to you. Of, it is as if the son's daily death gives him life. I
Mm,
I love that approach of him in this issue. And yes, of course, you can give the credit to the artists and stuff too, but I mean, there's still words on every single page and every panel, and that's such a great word. And then he's almost treated definitely the perspective shifts on that story as if Batman's, that he's a horror figure in that
mm,
story. And I think that's what makes it so intriguing and gives this great vibe of Batman and why people do love Batman as that dark figure because he's the hero, but almost everything about him can seem like, is he the villain?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I basically writing was easy for me. I
Hmm.
didn't, you may or may not know, I started out to be an artist because I love Dick Sprang and all that
Oh,
kind
I
of
didn't know
stuff.
that. No.
Yeah, no, I wanted to be an artist. It was art that brought me into comics, and that's what I was going to do. And through a series of weird coincidences and fate and all that, I ended up being a writer. And I like writing, and it
Hmm.
turns out writing is easy for me. I mean, I wasn't planning to go there, but writing is easy for me. And so for years, along the lines of what you were just talking about, people would say to me, "Oh, you did this thing." And I'd go, "Yeah, I just wrote it. I don't care." And it was my wife who finally said, "Yeah, but you did the work. You
Yes.
did actually do, you'd actually do that." So it's kind of the same deal. I mean, yeah, I was totally sincere when I said, I'm the low man on that totem pole. On the other hand, writing is fun and easy, so I hope I did something,
Hmm.
good with it. But so I don't want to. I shouldn't undersell it. But on the other hand, I
You're
mean,
modest.
they just came to me. I didn't,
You're modest. There you go.
yeah,
We'll keep giving you the credit, so you don't have to give it to yourself. All right.
yeah.
We'll give you some.
Okay.
I talked to actually last year. I think it was last year. I spoke to Michael Hewson, and I wasn't aware that that Night of the Stalker was an issue that he says that he gave to Tim Burton. And all these
Mhm.
years that I would watch that '89 movie, I never thought about it at all. And he said that's a nod to Night of the Stalker. It's that opening of Batman. And I'm like, how did I see this for years and read this for years, and I never really saw the impression it made on the opening of that movie? Clueless. What kind of
I
fan am I?
didn't. Yeah, that's the first time I'm hearing that. I
Yeah.
mean, the movie
Okay.
was based on the series that Marshall and I did, right? But
Hmm.
I never knew that Night of the Stalker had anything to do with it.
All right. Well, I'm glad to pass the word on then. So it's some
Yeah,
more
okay.
credit for you on Night of the
I'll
Stalker.
go
Okay.
back and watch the start of the movie again.
Yeah. There you go. What a tough assignment that'll be, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, let's move on to obviously the big one here. When I reached out to you and I told you that your run that you've probably heard countless times on Detective Comics, that is one of absolutely my favorite. I just say it's a Batman story. To me, it
Mhm.
just feels like it is a Batman story. It's one of my favorite Batman stories. Very impressionable on me when I finally, so I'm 2 hours north of Indianapolis, but I grew up an hour north from here, really close to the Michigan line. Very small town. Didn't really have comic racks or nothing. My only Batman reading would come at birthday and Christmas time when I'd get a trade
Oh,
paperback, and my
yeah.
uncle gave me a stack of comics from the early 90s. So I was really late to your run. It wasn't until I moved to Fort Wayne and there were actual comic shops in college around 2006. And I
Hmm.
started to go to those, and I would just go right to the graphic novel section and start picking up. And I saw this one, and I
Yeah.
was like, "Ooh, what's this? This looks fantastic." Oh, it's got, and then I just go to the back, and which it just says all these characters that I'm aware of. And I'm like, "Well,
Hmm.
this is an easy sell for me." It says 12.95. I've got $20. I'm in. And I
Yeah.
read it, and it quickly just became something that I just love to revisit. Um, Not just saying that because you're on here. I wouldn't have reached out to you if I didn't like it, obviously.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
just revisit it all the time. It's very comfortable Batman reading to me in the sense of this is, to me, this is Batman.
It was what I thought Batman was. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
So when Jeanette Kahn, because you said it, you had a really good, and I mean, I'd read it tons of times here of an introduction that you wrote for this trade paperback. I think it says it. This was collected and released in 1999. Oh my gosh, 26 years ago. Holy crap.
Mm.
Uh,
Well, I
but like
wrote it 50 years ago,
you
so
wrote, yeah, wow.
holy crap.
Um, you've mentioned how Jeanette Kahn had, and I don't want you to have to just keep repeating the same stuff over and over. Jeanette Kahn had reached out to you about doing Justice League, and you had a condition that you get to do Batman.
Right.
So, as you just said too, of definitive Batman, because you love Batman, and as you just said, we like Dick Sprang, or you like Dick Sprang. Do you approach, did you already have like a story in mind? What was your idea for Batman, or did you just want to nail down the job and then get to work on what you'd want to write?
Yeah. I mean, I was basically I'd quit comics. I'd quit
Yeah.
Marvel, which to me was, that was the only place I'd worked.
Hmm.
Um, and my wife had traveled for a year
Sorry,
in
my
Europe.
cat just keeps climbing on the desk.
Oh, hello, kitty.
All
I've got
right.
the door closed, so my cat doesn't do
Yeah, she
that.
snuck in here as I was trying to close the door right at the beginning.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
that's all right. Um, so my wife had traveled in Europe for a year before she met me, and I thought I want to go do that. So when I quit
Hmm.
comics, we started making arrangements to go to Europe in 6 months or 9 months or whatever we were doing. And then Jeanette called and said, can you come do for the Justice League what you did for the Avengers, i.e., give them personalities and stories and stuff. And I said, yeah, but only for this limited amount of time. I can only do it for so long, but I will do that. But that I saw was like, I thought, my only chance ever to write Batman,
Hmm.
which I love Batman, right?
Yeah.
So I said, I want to do Batman on his own. Um, and she said, okay. Um, so it was that I had no plans to write Batman until I had an assignment to write Batman. And then I started thinking about what I wanted to do in my limited time. Because again, it's like, if I'd signed on for the next 5 years, I would be working out longer term,
Sure.
you know, runs and so forth. But I thought there was only going to be 7 issues. It turned out there were 8 because the thing sold so well in the beginning that they added an extra issue in the summer. Um, but it was like, okay, I'm going to write this limited series thing. And unlike, shall I say, a lot of limited series today where people go, oh, well, I have an idea and it's got to run 6 issues so they
Yeah.
can collect it. So I just was trying to write 7 cool and then 8 cool issues of the character that I wanted to do. And there were several things I wanted to do. One, I wanted to bring back the dark, scary part from the 40s, right? I mean,
Yeah.
every once in a while when they do those specials, you'd get a story from the 40s. And I loved them. And I thought, we've totally lost that. I mean, there was no darkness, there was no ambiance. It was all very, Bruce Wayne was the young entrepreneur in Gotham City, and he lived in that thing with the tree up the middle, and
Hmm.
I mean, it was like, okay. Um, and the other thing was, I had always, ever since I was a kid, reading those books and all that, the one thing that bothered me about comics in the 50s and beyond really was that adults didn't act like adults. It didn't make sense to me, even as a kid, that if Lana Lang wanted to, or Vicky Vale, or whoever it was,
Hmm.
or Lois Lane wanted to snuggle up to the hero, that the hero would get embarrassed and kind of like push her away. And I thought, I don't, in my view of the world, I don't see adults acting like that a lot.
Yeah.
So I really wanted him to be, I wanted to make Bruce Wayne an adult superhero, an adult man, right? And that meant to me getting him an adult woman that he would be, have some relationship with, an adult sexual relationship. It was under the code, so the sex was under the code. But
Yeah.
um, so between bringing back the dark atmosphere from that had been lost and the homicidal Joker who had been lost, and building up Bruce Wayne as the person inside the suit. I'm always interested in the person inside the suit. The
Hmm.
Batman ambiance, all that's really cool. But
Yeah.
there's somebody in there doing that. And I figured he'd been lost as well. He was the young entrepreneur in the building in the middle of Gotham City. Um, so those two things. And then while building that out, then I had 7 issues later, 8, to do not only the Joker but the Penguin, and I mean, to really try to do everything I could. Batman.
Hmm.
This is my one shot, I thought, at
Yeah.
Batman. So I want to do every Batman thing. I want to do Robin. I want to put Robin in there. I mean, I want to like
Yeah.
everything that had made the Batman something, and then push him forward. And then I figured, okay, I will have done my job. I will have written a Batman that I totally believe in, that I really like, and I will have fixed him for
Hmm.
DC, right? My relationship with DC has not been good over the years, so sometimes I regret having done actually that. But
Mm.
as a professional and as a comic book lover, I wanted to do the best I could for the company that was employing me. So.
Yeah. Everything that you're saying about your approach, there's a couple of things as we just mentioned of Dick Sprang being, one of your favorites, and it will get me. So artist Lieber Mayo said similar things of he loved Dick Sprang's art, loves Dick Sprang's art. And his, obviously to me, I think of very, bright and fun comic books. And then Lieber Mayo's art is almost the exact opposite of that. It's very dark, very mature. You like Dick Sprang's art, and to me, it's very bright and it's fun. And then your story, I'm not saying like it's dark as in like a rated R comic book, but it is, it's a more dark, serious, gritty kind of Batman. And I think that always fascinates me of when your definitive Batman is this version, but your favorite Batman is almost something very different, which is always fascinating to me.
Well, but Dick Sprang, I mean, again, with those incredible perspectives and so
Yeah,
forth, you were living that to me is a Batman-esque world. I mean, it's a little
sure.
crazy. It's a
Hmm.
little, it may not have been, I mean, I forget exactly how dark you would quantify Dick Sprang. Um, I don't know that I would have said bright because we're dealing with a
Sure.
guy in a bat costume and, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it was the ambiance. I mean, the Dick Sprang thing, when you read a Dick Sprang thing, you were in a kind of a different reality,
Yeah.
right? Things were like extreme, so forth.
Which is
And
the
that,
point of comics.
yeah, yeah,
Which is the
yeah,
point of comics.
yeah. And so that different reality thing, the idea that
Hmm.
Batman lives in a kind of a crazy world, and I said that
Yeah.
somewhere in there, right? I mean, the world is crazy.
Yeah.
Um, that's all intrinsic to Batman. So, I mean, I got that from Dick Sprang, but then, you know,
Sure.
threw it in the mix along with the Joker and the darkness and the Silver St. Cloud.
So there's a lot of everything like that you're saying with Dick Springs world and stuff. I love Batman comics from each decade. Each, I think he always say that he's so malleable. Like one of the very few superheroes, if maybe the only one that can kind of fit into almost any kind of genre.
Maybe not space aliens from the 50s, though.
Well, okay, right there, that's where I can tune out. It's a tough read to read some
Yeah,
of those if he's in space with the alien, like, ugh. But your focus. This is my favorite kind of Batman because it is. I like spectacle in movies and TV shows and comics. They're fun. I really like Batman. We are down in Gotham on the streets with him,
yeah,
which is what this is, and it is looking at, the personality behind the mask, which is always great. Yes, we want a Batman comic. We don't necessarily want only Bruce Wayne, but we care more about Batman if we care about Bruce Wayne. And
mm,
so I think that's why this is such a standout to me because there isn't, well, the whole city's gonna blow up and, a nuclear explosion here. Batman's going around the globe. It's like, no, he's in Gotham, taking on real threats that are right there in front of him and in
yeah. That
his web of other, allies and
Yeah,
such.
yeah, that definitely the Gotham thing. But I will say once more, I plotted those stories. I wrote those
Hmm.
stories in advance, as it turned out. So I mean, yes, I wanted him in Gotham, but I didn't know he was going to be as in Gotham as Marshall Rogers and Terry Austin made him,
Yeah.
right? Marshall had studied architecture. Marshall loved buildings and so forth, and he just went off on Gotham City. And so Gotham City, which was not one of the things that I said, oh, I really have to emphasize that. He
Hmm.
emphasized it and added to the mix, right?
Yeah.
That's what I've always said with those stories. I mean, all three of us, me, Marshall, and Terry, just love the Batman. And I just told you how much I wanted to do a good
Yeah.
Batman. They wanted to do a good Batman too. And so that's why the whole thing is what it is, you know?
Yeah.
So,
The most fascinating thing that I think a lot of people now is maybe myself included. I can say it, but I wasn't there. Is the difference in collaborating now compared to then? And
mm,
almost another mind-blowing thing of this is to learn that you didn't even know who was going to do the art for your stories. You
no,
found out after they were all done.
right.
That is wild.
Well, I mean, again, I was working for DC and DC was in a bad place. The reason I was
Hmm.
working for DC is because Jeanette was given the responsibility and she knew DC was in a bad
Yeah.
place. So she hired me over to, to do something with her characters. Um, because Neil by that time was off doing the X-Men
Hmm.
and Gil Kane was off doing Spider-Man and Bob Brown was doing the Beast with me. And I mean, it was like
Yeah.
all the top guys at DC had gone to Marvel because Marvel was more fun and they were, selling more books and all that stuff. So the odds were that because I wrote these scripts in advance and the
Hmm.
odds were they were going to be given to a couple of journeymen,
Yeah.
some just
Sure.
whoever DC could get. Um, they did in fact, for whatever reason, choose Marshall and Terry. But I don't know if you've heard this, stop me if you have, or maybe
No,
your
go
audience
ahead.
hasn't. But DC hated their artwork. Joe Orlando,
Unbelievable.
Joe Orlando, Joe Orlando. Terry tells me these stories
Uh-huh.
that every month they would get called in, and Joe Orlando would just rip them up one side and down the other about how terrible this art was. Terry again told me a story where he was sitting out in the outside Joe's office, hearing these loud voices from inside. And then Marshall came out and he was kind of shaken and white and all this kind of stuff. But
Wow.
for whatever reason, they didn't throw him off the book, right? I mean, it's like
Yeah.
I wasn't there, so I
Yeah.
don't know how all that was happening. But DC didn't, it was not, because DC had a house style. These are the guys who redrew Jack Kirby's Superman, right? They
Yeah.
looked at Jack Kirby's Superman. They said, well, that doesn't look like us, so we'll fix that. Why they didn't do that to Marshall and Terry, why they chose Marshall and Terry in the first place. Have you interviewed Terry?
No, I would love to talk to Terry.
Yeah, he's very shy, but
Oh
I mean,
yeah? Okay.
he doesn't do a lot of personal appearances and so
Sure.
forth. But so I can't say for sure that he would talk to you. But I mean, if you do, you can
Hmm.
get the firsthand version of all this stuff. But um, no, they didn't. They didn't like it. And again, I we started out. It was going to be Walt Simonson and Al
Hmm.
Milgrom, right? And Walt was just going to do layouts, and Milgrom was going to finish it off. And it was taking a while to do that. And also, I've worked with both those guys. I'm a big fan of both of those guys. But there's, layouts. Milgrom has a loose inking style. So for him to finish off layouts, you're going to get kind of a loose
Hmm.
overall art, which is not really what Batman ought to be, I don't think. Um, and so again, it was a different time. There was no question of my going in and saying, "Oh, I want somebody else to draw this book." Right. But again, so that was Julie Schwartz's decision, I guess,
Hmm.
to bounce them and go with Marshall and Terry. And, can't ask Julie, can't ask Marshall, how that all transpired. But so the first couple issues didn't really have the art that I was hoping they would have.
Hmm.
Um, Even though it was Simonson and Milgrom, I mean, but it
Yeah.
wasn't working for Batman, I didn't think. And then I was running out of time. So I was doing it. I did those first books Marvel style, which is where you tell the artist the story and let him tell it the way he wants to, which I prefer as a general rule. I'd rather have the artist be able to like do the story in the most visually
Sure.
impressive way possible. But um, all in all, I ran out of time. I had to write the things, and I hadn't done a lot of full scripts because I'd been working Marvel style, working for
Hmm.
Marvel. And one thing I did discover in writing full scripts is that I could control the pace of it, you know? So, I mean, if you trust your artist, he's going to get a good pace. But in this case, at least, as I was trying to do this atmospheric
Hmm.
ambiance, darkness, the ability to kind of control the flow of the story I found I liked that. But in any event, I got done. I had all these scripts done, handed them in, left the country, traveled around Europe. And it was 6 months later that I got a package from Julie with all the printed books in it,
Of
And
the whole run?
yeah, the whole run.
Yeah.
Could it have
Okay.
been 6 months? It would have been. Yeah, whatever.
Okay.
Uh,
Wow.
and and I am not traditionally religious, but I honestly, when I looked at those books for the first time, I said, "Thank you, God." I
Yeah.
mean, it's like this is everything that I wanted it to be, and and how it got to be that way, it just was divine intervention or something. So yeah,
Yeah.
I was expecting, and I've also said this is a little bit inside comics, but
Sure.
if those same scripts would have been the same scripts, but if they'd been drawn by a couple of hacks, people wouldn't like the books as much. And I've learned from experience they wouldn't think the scripts were as good either. They
Yeah.
just think the whole package was substandard, and people can't differentiate. I early on I sort of would say, well, this, somebody else's stuff. I'd say, well, this story's really good, but the art, people
Hmm.
don't usually separate the two. So, I mean, total luck,
Hmm.
divine intervention, whatever it was, that everything kind of worked out, even though DC didn't want it. I mean, it was like, uh, and in fact, I mean, speaking of DC not wanting it, they didn't ask us to do it again for 30 years, right? So,
It's wild. Do you remember how long after the fact, like when you got to actually talk to Marshall and Terry?
yeah, when I came back to America, we, I had started writing a book at that
Hmm.
point, a novel. That's what I was going to do next. And we sublet a professor's apartment at Columbia for 3 months in the summer when we came back. So I was in New York for 3 months, and so was Marshall and Terry. And so that's when I met them for the first time. Um, and and I didn't hear the stories about how DC hated their art until 30 years later. I didn't hear that at the time.
Wow.
Um, but yeah, we got to be friends that summer, and obviously, we all shared a lot of similar things that we liked.
Yeah.
Um, but I know I came back and everything I was hearing was that this book was selling like crazy. And I went to Jeanette and I said, how about a bonus? And she said, as DC always did, as I understand it now, she said, "Oh no, the book didn't sell. No, sorry. We didn't." And I said, "Well, for a book that didn't sell, it sure seems like everybody's got a copy."
Yeah.
But she was like, "No, no, no, we didn't
Hmm.
make any money on this, so we can't give a bonus." Um,
Okay. All
so,
right.
um, so there was that. But then, and then you may or may not know, Marshall and I wanted to do a Batman thing that we could publish ourselves. And in those days, Batman was still, had not become what he is now.
Hmm.
And so DC entertained that we wanted to do a black and white Batman story, published it like an independent, published and we'd make the money after we gave DC whatever it was they wanted for it. Um, and that's an interesting story in that it didn't happen. But my memory of it is that it didn't happen because they said we can only do 10,000 copies, that, it had to be a very small print run if we did this.
Hmm.
Mike Friedrich, who was my agent at the time and was involved with it, he remembers distinctly that we didn't do it because they said you can't do it in color. Um, Neither one of us, I mean, we're both very sure that that's what we remember, but there's two different stories for why we didn't do it. But we didn't do it.
Yeah.
And all I can really tell you about it, it was going to be something where Batman was on a dirigible coming back from Europe, and there was going to be a fight in a dirigible over the Atlantic. That was, I don't remember anything else about what we were thinking at that time. But that was like, a year after the first run.
Yeah.
And that didn't happen. And then, as I say, they didn't ask us again for 30 years. And part of that is the movie. And part of that, I mean, again, I'll just go off on DC here, but I mean, that thing you showed me before, it's called Strange Apparitions.
Yeah.
Where did that title come from, right?
That's what I've
That's
wondered.
got
Yeah.
nothing. They didn't publish it as, you know, Joker Returns by, or whatever. They published it under a name where you wouldn't necessarily be able to find it.
Yeah.
And they don't like it if people say, "Oh, that's Englehart, Rogers, Austin, Batman." They want people to say that's DC's Batman. They
Hmm.
don't, Alan Moore ran into that. I mean, they, I was about to give you another example, and I'm not going to get into anybody else's business, but I know other people who
Sure.
have done stuff which is demonstrably theirs, and
Yeah.
DC doesn't want to do that. So, I mean, there's a lot of factors in there, and then there's the movie, which had its own problems with all this. But in any event, um,
Does it, bother you if someone calls it strange apparitions, or do you,
no,
it's
because
fine because
that's,
you
I
know
mean,
it's your work.
yeah, I mean, that's
Yeah.
what it
They
is. That's
know.
how they republished it. But I
Yeah.
mean, if you were just going out to look for, something that had a recognizable title, Strange Apparitions would not be it. So
Yeah.
I always
Sure.
thought that was typical.
Did you get any kind of heads up when they release? I always get them confused. They do either Tales of the Batman or Legends of the Dark Knight collections with, artists or writers, and they did one for Marshall and they did one for you. Do
Right.
you get a kind of heads up that that's coming ever?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
they do. They tell us that.
that's good. I bought
Um,
that too.
yeah,
I bought that too.
yeah. They're basically the same book, except there's a little more Marshall in the Marshall, and there's a little more me in the other, but the
Yeah.
overlap is there. Um, yeah, I mean, I'm dealing with Jim Lee now at DC, and he seems like a good guy, and
Hmm.
so we may be
Sure.
coming together on all this, but I've had a long history of being, messed with
Clash.
by
Yeah.
DC because I always thought Marvel was a bunch of guys who liked doing comics and they got together and they did comics. DC was a publisher who hired people to provide content primarily. Dick Sprang might have gone off Kurt Swan may be a legend, et cetera, Neil Adams, but
Sure.
they never had the sense. It was always from their corporate standpoint rather than from down on the street. We like comics with
Hmm.
DC.
Um, Bringing it back, because I had a list of some of these characters, and it's almost paired up. It's fun and to think about different time in the 70s with comics compared to now, obviously. Right
Yes,
now, if we want to go read any issue of Batman, it's right here at our computer. Just type it in, we can find it.
right,
Then I feel like it was probably pretty hard to track down, and you dusted off two characters in Hugo Strange and Deadshot, and
right,
then you two characters familiar to Batman fans in Joker and Penguin. And then you created three characters in Dr. Phosphorus, Rupert Thorne, and Silver St. Cloud.
right.
I guess for each one, each pairing, um, like what sparked for you of, ooh, Hugo Strange. We haven't seen him in 30 years. That's a good fit. And the same for Deadshot was in one comic book 20
Yeah,
years ago, and you thought
yeah.
he's a good ad here. Like where does your mindset go as a writer for that of, oh, that sounds good, that sounds good. Let's create these ones.
Well, I had to create Silver, as I said before, because I wanted to come up with a woman who was strong enough to hang
Yeah.
with Bruce Wayne. I did want to do Gotham City corruption thing, so there came Boss Thorne. Um, but as far as the other guys go, I did go back when I got the assignment. DC had, probably does still, a library where everything they'd ever published had been put together in bound books.
I want to go
Right.
there.
Yeah, well, nobody ever had. I mean,
Ugh.
when I got the Batman thing, I said the first thing I said was I want to read the first 2 years of Detective Comics because, as you say, they weren't otherwise available.
Hmm.
Um, and they said, okay, but nobody has ever asked to read the old books, right? But I said, well, I want to do that. So I did read the first 2 years of Detective, and that's where Hugo Strange came from. I wanted to bring back that ambiance, and I wanted to bring back the Joker, certainly. But in looking at all of that, Hugo Strange jumped out at me as somebody that I could work with
Yeah.
today, and it would also indicate, oh yeah, he's reaching back to the origins of this character,
Hmm.
and at the same time, I'm reaching forward with Silver St. Cloud, and what can I do? Um, so Hugo was there because he had monsters and he looked like a 1940s villain,
Hmm.
and there was that. Um, and as I said, it was originally going to be 7 issues, and I had plotted it as to how that story would work in 7 issues. And then Julie Schwartz said, there's going to be another issue. We're going to put another issue in the summer. And that turned out good from a writing standpoint because it let me sort of breathe. The stuff I was going to do, I still did, but now I had a little extra space to like play with it. But I needed a villain for that issue because that wasn't in the original thing. And it was Julie who said, "How about Deadshot?" Now
So that was the
I,
eighth issue. I think I've
yeah.
wondered that. I don't know if I've come across it or not. And it was what is the eighth issue? What is the eighth issue? And yeah, the
No, well,
Deadshot
it
one.
actually was, in the order of things, it was like the sixth or seventh. But I
Yeah.
mean, but it opened up a total of 8. Um, so I didn't remember Deadshot.
Hmm.
And Julie's the guy who said, "Yeah, he wore a tuxedo and 6 guns." It's like, but that's the guy you want. Well, Julie was famous for being a hands-on editor. That there were a lot of stories that he would bring Gardner Fox or John Broome in, and he'd say, "I want to do a story this month about this," and
Hmm.
then they'd talk about it, and the writer would make something out of what Julie wanted to do. So when I said to Jeanette, I want to do Batman, but you want me to do what I did at Marvel, and what I did at Marvel, I had complete freedom to do whatever I wanted to do at Marvel. I didn't have an editor hanging over me. Is
Yeah.
that going to be a problem? And she said no, and she obviously went and talked to Julie about it. And Julie never once, I mean, he never like told me what to do.
Hmm.
And B, he never complained about having been told that he had to do that or whatever. Julie was a good guy. And he did recognize talent, good stories, whatever you want to say here. So he let me do what I wanted to do, which is the only way that it could get done.
Sure.
And but then when he said, dude, how about Deadshot? It's like, okay, Julie, if you want Deadshot, I'll do something with Deadshot because you've done it for me. The other thing, actually, in my original script, when they killed Hugo Strange,
Hmm.
who then got better later,
Yeah.
um, I had him beaten to death on camera. And
Hmm.
Julie said, why don't we move that off camera? Right. So Julie, he only made a couple of suggestions and they were good suggestions, right? But he was not with me, he was not the I'm in charge kind of guy that we'd heard of before.
I
Uh,
really quick,
yeah,
I
go ahead.
wonder with that and how beaten off screen a suggestion to like I reread the run before talking to you and that and then opening up I think 473 the Penguin issue where you have
Hmm.
two guys on the dock talking about what they've just done. We don't see it. And I wondered if that was also part of under comics code or not or if that was just storytelling device.
That was just storytelling.
Okay,
I because with the Penguin, I wanted to do a classic Penguin story with
sure.
clues and mysteries
Hmm.
and stuff, and that takes time, so I had
Yeah.
to like collapse other parts of it.
Gotcha.
No, that was just storytelling. But in any event, I mean,
Yeah.
it all went smoothly. Meanwhile, I was doing the Justice League for Julie as well, So I mean, nobody ever talks about the Justice League, but I had a good time on the Justice League too. But
Okay.
we're not on
I haven't
Justice
read it.
League.
Yeah,
Huh?
exactly. I was gonna say I just haven't read many because I'm a
Yeah,
Batman guy. I know where my interest goes, and it's always towards Batman.
sure.
But I have it. I'm gonna read it. I promise you, Steve. I'm gonna read the Justice League run.
Okay.
I'm gonna do it.
It
You
was,
can quiz me later.
well, it was fun. It was, having my shot at all the DC characters was, fun for
Yeah.
me. But again, that was the Justice League was your sort of bright and shiny thing that you
Hmm.
were talking about, whereas
Yeah.
Batman was a totally different run.
The the Deadshot issue, and you mentioned Dick Sprang, and I was actually gonna ask you too, if you'd put the massive typewriter that they're on, if you
Yeah,
wrote that, and was
yeah,
that your nod for Dick Sprang?
yeah.
Okay.
The Batman of my youth in the 50s
Hmm.
had giant typewriters
Exactly.
and stuff. Um, yes. So everything that had made me a Batman fan was what I
Yeah.
wanted to get into this. If I'd had twice as many issues, there would have been twice as much stuff, probably. But
Yeah.
I had to narrow it down, and it was easy enough. Once I made Silver a convention planner,
Hmm.
have a convention with a giant typewriter.
It only makes sense,
Yeah,
Why not?
yeah, sure.
You were talking about Julie being kind of hands, like you being able to do what you wanted to do. And I think there's some big swings in this too, that of course it seems that's the only way that it could be done, and how you have uh somebody finding out Batman's identity, in which as a reader you're like, how's he gonna get out of this one?
Yeah,
You have the silver aspect, like you'd said, of kind of maturing, mature female in comics and adult relationships. You have then Hugo being killed. You have his spirit sort of haunting Rupert Thorne. It's like there's some big swings in here that yeah, it is now, and of course it's always looking back on it. Any of that changing, it just seems like no, it wouldn't work. It just wouldn't work as
it
well.
was it just everything felt right to
Yeah.
me, and I'd get an idea, and I'd go, yeah, I could that will work, and again, he let me do it. The boss Thorne ghost thing,
Hmm.
Hugo Strange, that came from Dick Tracy, who I also loved as a kid. Um, Dick Tracy had the weird Batman-esque villains, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if you know much about Dick Tracy
I
these
don't know
days.
that much. Aesthetically, I know the looks, but I didn't read much Dick Tracy.
You could definitely enjoy reading
Yeah.
collected Dick Tracy, the Chester Gould stuff, not, with,
Hmm.
and Gould got kind of flabby toward the end. He had people from the moon and so forth, which
Oh,
didn't
oh
really,
boy. Okay.
but it's been reprinted. I've, a bunch of times, but 30s, 40s, 50s, Dick Tracy,
Yeah.
fabulous. As a Batman fan, you would love it.
All right.
Good art,
Writing it down.
good dark art, weird villains, shaky, um, Joe Flattop. And there was a story in the 50s where I think it was, yeah, Joe Period, it was his name. He was a juvenile delinquent, killed a girl, and then she came back as a ghost and hung around his neck. And that was my homage to that. That's where, I mean, I had loved that as a reader, and I
Hmm.
thought that would be cool. And it's on the edge of Batman, perhaps, to have a ghost. And at the same time, it wasn't out of the
Yeah.
ballpark, I didn't think, have a, or at least to have a guy think he has a ghost, I don't know.
That's what I was gonna say to you then, writing it, or maybe you don't reveal because some people don't like to reveal. Do you think that's a literal ghost, or is it Thorne kind of projecting it? Because there's some kind of it's hard for me to think that Thorne has guilt for doing the bad things he does, but is there
Right.
something he himself is projecting about what he did to Hugo Strange?
I I never had to distinguish, and so I
Yeah.
didn't. But I
All
mean, the
right.
the theory was that the ghost, as you say, Hugo Strange or Thorne's not likely to feel much guilt. But if you've got a ghost hanging around your neck of a guy that you killed, that's how he
Yeah.
got there to be confessing everything that he ever did, blah, blah,
Yeah.
blah. Um, yeah, I mean, just
It's up to the reader.
yeah,
Up to the reader.
it's up to the reader. And again, everything in there
Hmm.
was there for a reason. Because I mean, usually the reason was I like this and I want to do something with it. I mean, I've one of my pet peeves about some comic stuff is that people go, "Ooh, I really liked this thing. I'm going to do it again."
Yeah.
Which is
Hmm.
different from I really liked this thing. How can I spin off of that? Which is what I always tried to do. I mean, I didn't just replicate things that I'd read when I was 6 years old. I mean, it's like that's a cool idea. What can I do with it? Was kind of my
It,
approach
it it it
to
seems
these
like
things.
things how I've seen a lot when it comes to like this is the movie that I'm making a movie that I would want to watch. I'm writing a
Mhm.
book that I would want to read. And it seems like that's probably how it seems like your approach to in comic stuff. This is what I would want to read in a Batman
Yeah,
comic.
when I was just a fan,
Yeah.
just a fan. I read everything. I
Hmm.
read mediocre superhero books in the 50s, but then in the 60s, I was reading DC, Marvel, Gold Key, Charlton, and I read the romance books, and I read the Western books, and I read the monster books. I,
Hmm.
you know, I read everything. I just loved comics as a medium, and so I knew when I'd read a story and I'd go, "Ooh, that's a good story."
Yeah.
I just put that in there, and it wasn't like now I will do that same thing over again. It's just like I got an endorphin hit when I read that story.
Hmm.
How can I give you an endorphin hit, when I'm
Yeah.
writing a story, right? That was my approach. Yes, I tried to make
That's
my
a good
stuff.
writer.
Well, I just, it's like I was entertained at one point. I wanted
Yeah.
you to be entertained,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's
Hey,
that
I
was
was
the
entertained. I'm still
okay.
entertained. So there
There
you
you
go. You
go.
did your job.
Yeah,
There's it doesn't it's not a massive highlight, but there's an image here in this run that I've always really liked, and I know it's because also it was an inspiration for one of the episodes in the animated series in the 90s. But
right.
in when Strange is gonna auction off Batman's identity, and I just love those three panels
Yeah,
of I just like there's I have no question. It's just telling you of like that always stands out to me. I've
yeah.
always liked that so much. I just thought it was so cool.
Well, that was in the script. That's what I asked for. But again, the artistic choices are
Hmm.
Marshall's, right? As to
Yeah.
exactly how to do that. So again, we were both on the same wavelength when it came to that. But yeah,
Uh
no, being in the darkened theater and you can't really see
yeah. But
that's
we
all
know, as fans,
that's
we
all
know who it
Batman.
is. Yep.
Yeah, the
Yeah, the
purple.
atmosphere of it too. Of course, it's in an old theater and all that. The I've been building up to this part of the laughing fish.
Yeah.
You've probably been asked every question that there is asked about the laughing fish. What one of the greatest Joker stories of all time. I'm
Mm.
not going to say I've read every single Joker comic. I haven't. Flat out. I've read a lot. And it is absolutely one of my favorite Joker stories of all time. It is so perfectly encapsulates Joker. Wild,
Okay.
funny, but dark and evil. And just the whole idea of itself is such a joke that, of course, that's what the Joker would do. Of course it would.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the Joker, I always thought the thing about the Joker is his plans would work if they weren't messed up by Batman. I mean, he will say, "I want to rob a bank and I want a pony in a tutu," and he would put those together and come up with a plan that would actually work, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he didn't come up with crazy ideas that didn't work. They
Hmm.
would have worked, except Batman screwed it up. But he always would want stuff. He would want to
Yeah.
do something crazy. He'd want to, advertise the fact that he was crazy, and he liked being crazy. Um, so that's where the laugh. I mean, the laughing fish. It's
Hmm.
like, as anybody else can look at laughing fish and go, "That's nuts."
Yeah.
But the Joker's like, "Yeah, it is," and
I
you
want
know, and I'm going to make a lot of money out of it.
it. You
So
you can't get me a trademark on that? Well, then I'm gonna kill you at midnight.
yeah,
What? How is
yeah,
that? That's not
yeah,
okay.
yeah. I mean, the original Joker, again,
Hmm.
for people who haven't read that stuff, which I did, the original guy was a homicidal maniac, right? And every story for the first 2 years, every Joker story ended with him either dying
Yeah.
or being thrown in jail. And then every next Joker story always started with him not actually dying or breaking out of jail. It had continuity, which was unusual in the 40s, but
Hmm.
you know, and but he was dark and crazy in those days. And then, when Batman really got to be popular, they decided to make it family friendly, and then the Joker became the funny guy for a
Yeah.
long time, right? But the first 2 years of the Joker were pretty dark, as by 1940 standards. Um, and so that's the guy because before me, um, Neil Adams,
Hmm.
my idol, and Denny had done the Joker's five-way revenge.
Ah,
But
another greatest Joker story, like another top Joker story.
yeah, but if I
But
may say,
okay.
uh, I mean, the Joker was trying to do something about pollution, and what does the Joker care about pollution? It was to me, everybody loves that story, and I love those guys. But to me, that story was like, we're going to do sort of a standard Batman story, except we're going to put the Joker in it.
Mhm.
And I didn't feel that we got much out of the Joker in that. Um, and I really wanted to, I mean, what I wanted was the dark and scary guy from the 40s. So I didn't find that in the five-way revenge.
Fair
But again,
enough.
I'm not here to tell you that that wasn't a good story.
That I'm
It just
wrong.
wasn't.
You're
No, it
wrong,
just
Ryan.
wasn't.
No,
No, but it just wasn't. It didn't do
no.
much. It didn't do much for me from what I wanted
Fair.
to see in that character.
Uh, a nice touch that you have in that issue is I forget who the Joker says it to, but he does not want anybody to know Batman's identity.
Yeah,
And that is such a great small little note, but a small aspect of Joker that's my Joker. That's he doesn't want to know because to him he'd find it hilarious that he could possibly run into Batman on the streets, but it's not Batman. Like
yeah,
he'd find that as like a funny joke for some reason. So for him
yeah.
to
He
not
would.
want that, I think that's a great touch in this too. That's my favorite Joker.
Well, and also he kind of considers Batman as his other half.
Yeah.
His
Hmm.
arch, the other side of the equation, and he didn't want anybody else screwing that up.
Yeah, it's
He
his.
doesn't want Batman. Yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, I've always seen it as Batman is as driven as possible, and he's out there on the edge using every bit of what he has to bring to the table. If he
Hmm.
took one more step, he'd be crazy. That's why I've
Yeah.
never bought into the idea that Batman is crazy. He's not crazy. He's totally holding it together out on the edge, as far out as you can go. Whereas the Joker has gone over the edge. And so the two of them, this totally structured, will not go over the edge guy versus the Joker. The two of them are yin and yang, I mean,
Yeah.
they're so, and that's why, I mean, I really liked the Penguin thing on
Hmm.
Max, whatever it is now.
Yeah.
Um, uh, I'd been, I wrote something a couple years ago for some Batman compilation thing. I said, love the Joker, glad to have brought the Joker back, but now it's Joker all the time.
Yeah.
Let's make somebody else the same status, because it's always the Joker's up here and Penguin
Yeah.
might be here, and
Oh
then
yeah.
and then it goes down quick after that, right? I mean, the Scarecrow and Two-Face. Well, Two-Face is pretty good, but I mean, the Joker's always
Oh
the
yeah.
guy,
He
right?
is.
And I thought, okay, but let's make somebody else
Hmm.
on that level. And take no credit for it, but I mean, making the Penguin into somebody who's also formidable,
Yeah.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, because he was never necessarily one of my earlier grown up before I started to really dive into more Batman comics and stuff. Like just wasn't the Joker. He wasn't the
Right,
Riddler, he wasn't the Scarecrow. I'm like, "Oh, okay, it's Penguin. He's fine." And they've really done a really good job probably the past decade plus. Um More exposure of him where he is more like in here. I love that issue in here. I'm not disregarding that by any means. They've started to do a really good job of building him up to where he is more fascinating to me than he used to be.
right. The Penguin in my story is the traditional Penguin in that
Hmm.
regard. I
Yeah.
mean, again, hopefully fully traditional, because there's a mystery and a clues
Yeah, it's
and
really
all that
fun.
kind of thing. But he's still the guy with the cigarette
Yeah.
holder and the top hat and all
Yeah, his
that.
little
You know?
tuxedo. Two
Yeah,
things you did with the Joker on this or aside from the three panels where Joker's teased, the other one that I always remember and think of is as Batman is swinging through chasing Deadshot, and you hear the laughter, and it's the tease of like, the not yet, another not
yeah,
yet. And we don't even see him fully formed. And then
yeah,
also in that laughing fish, it's like a fourth wall breaking Joker at the bottom corner of the page where he busts through and he's turning the page of
yeah.
like, we'll
That was
get back to
Marshall.
him. That's
Yeah,
awesome. That's
that was
awesome.
Marshall doing that. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you didn't script that at all. He just did it, and you're like, oh, that's
No,
cool.
I wrote all those little panels, but it was Marshall who decided,
That's so
to do that.
that's great. Um, I mean, I want to respect your time, but I have a whole other page of questions to ask you that maybe I'll just have to hold on to them, and I'll just have to
I
ask
don't
you
know.
another time.
We have done an hour. I'm surprised.
We
That
that
went by
fast.
quick.
It sure did. That means that I was having a good time. Hope you were too.
Yeah.
You have on your website, and I've wanted to ask you about this. You have it's asked something about scripts. What is that
Oh
about
yeah.
scripts that people can purchase?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, if you want to read an original script from one of the comics, only going back into the 80s. I don't have anything from the 70s, sadly.
Okay.
Um, um, but yeah, you can get in touch with me through the website, and I think they're $20 now. Um, uh, some people like to read the original scripts and see how
Mm-hmm.
the stuff was done.
Yeah.
Other people, I find, can't read scripts if they don't have pictures with them. So it's like,
Mm-hmm.
if that interests somebody, then yeah, you can just go to steveenglehart.com and send me a query about it.
All right. One last question, because and I can't hold on to this one, is in knowing um there was another Dark Detective 2 that
Right.
was scripted by you. Would you be able to share basically what the synopsis of that was going to be? Because I don't think I've ever seen what that was gonna be, if you've ever said.
Oh yeah, no, that's actually, I call it Dark Detective 3. We
Okay.
The original run was just Detective Comics, and then when we did the second one in the 2006 or whatever it
Right
was,
there.
yeah. So we called it Marshall and I called it Dark Detective 2. We just said that
Okay.
first one was Dark Detective 1, this is number 2, and
Gotcha.
then we
Okay.
did another version, and we did a third one, but then Marshall died, and DC didn't want to publish it, and so
Yeah.
forth. It's a Penguin story. It actually is. I mean, we
Oh,
don't find that out for a couple of issues. It's got Killer Moth, it's got Deadshot, it's got, I think there's another villain that I'm forgetting at this point. It's basically a continuation of the second thing in that, since it's not readily available, I don't mind saying,
okay.
um, it's a continuation. Silver has gone back to Evan, who's had his arm and his leg cut off in the
Yeah.
Joker's house, right? And when I did this Dark Detective 2, as I call
Hmm.
it, in 2006, I really wanted him to be a good guy. I mean, as Bruce Wayne's rival, I didn't want him to be some asshole where you would just go, "Oh
Yeah.
yeah, of course," No, I wanted him to be a real
Yeah.
guy. So he was definitely a good guy. But in the third issue, having had his arm and his leg cut off, he's become bitter. And Silver is with him more out of obligation than out of, you know,
Okay. Yeah.
she's into Batman now. She switched her allegiance to Batman, but she's there taking care of him, helping him out. But then, okay, so Two-Face
Hmm.
comes to Evan and says, you've been screwed. I've been screwed. I know how this works. I can be your sort of political advisor here, and I can show you, what you have to do now that you've been, your girl doesn't like you. The Batman took her away. You've had your arm and your leg cut off. And so Evan goes to the dark side at that point. And there's a scene where Two-Face comes to him and explains to him why he should come to the dark side. It was ripped off completely in the Nolan movie where the Joker comes to Two-Face and does this exact same thing. Um, Part of my DC problems.
Hmm.
Um, but anyway, so by the end of the issue, um, Two-Face and Evan are trying to kill Silver because she knows what has
Hmm.
happened to Evan and who he's been dealing with. And the third run, while Batman's fighting the Penguin and all these other people, by the time he gets to Silver, that run is over. And I was going to do a fourth run,
Oh, wow.
which is basically um, 6 issues, sort of like, well, Two-Face and Evan sort of recruit all the major Batman villains that I haven't used yet, Poison Ivy and people. And says whoever kills Silver St. Cloud gets a zillion dollars, whatever. And so it's Batman and Silver sort of fighting their way from the Wayne Mansion to City Hall or wherever they have
Hmm.
to get in order to deliver the
Wow.
evidence. And but each issue is like a different battle
Hmm.
with these villains as they try to make their way across the city and so forth. That's only conceptual. I plotted it
Sure.
in my brain to that extent, and that's all
Yeah.
I really know about it. The third one did get written. The third one, there are 6 scripts. Marshall penciled the first issue. He was like 99% done with it when he
Yeah.
died, right? So there is art, there's martial art for the first issue. Um, a guy in Finland actually was so caught up in this that he drew the second issue in Marshall's style, and
Wow.
that's on my website as well. The other 4 they have no art.
Yeah.
When Marshall died, I mean, and so now we come back to, and I'll wrap this up with,
No, that's okay.
with the DC thing. When Marshall died, Walt Simonson and Paul Gulacy, among others, said, we will finish that as an homage to Marshall. And DC said, no, don't want to
Ugh.
do it. Terry again tells me that the editor, our editor on those books, called him up and said, well, Marshall's death gives us the excuse not to have to publish this. They really did not want us to be seen as the face of the
Hmm.
of the character, right? And so um, never been published, but I put the scripts on the website and they're
All
free.
right.
I mean, if you want to, it's a big download, but if somebody wants that, go to the website and go look for
Okay.
Dark Detective 3 and there's a link to download the whole thing, six
I
scripts
down I did
and art.
download it and it's in
Okay.
a format that my computer I gotta be able to convert it with some put it on my computer to be able to see it. So I've got it and I've because I've long been interested in that too and wondering in this this age now of if they would ever pursue trying to get that done or if without
I,
Marshall it's just not gonna happen.
I don't know. I met with Jim Lee in February
Oh, cool.
and said, if you guys are interested, maybe now that
Yeah.
you're in charge, maybe you'd be interested. And uh, I have not heard anything since.
Okay. Yeah.
So, um, Jim has said a couple of times, I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm going to. So we'll
We'll
see.
see. Yeah.
We'll
We'll see.
see.
Okay.
Because Walt's still here, and
Hmm.
and Walt would do it. There are probably half a dozen other people who might be interested in drawing that stuff, but that's again, people would say to me, "Why didn't you do Batman for 30 years?" And it's like, because DC never asked us to do it.
Hmm.
They own the character. I can only do Batman if they let me do Batman. So,
All right.
you
Well,
know, anyway,
Steve wants to do Batman. Let him do Batman.
does I does.
Yeah, like I said, I have a ton of questions still, but we'll save that maybe another time, maybe not. No obligation on your part, but I do want to thank you for sitting down with me now and talking to me for an hour.
Sure,
This has
that's
been very
fine.
nice talking to you.
If you want to
Um,
do it again, that's fine too.
okay, they heard it. Everybody's gonna hear that. They're gonna be
Okay.
waiting for you to come back and talk to me. Okay.
Okay.
As for now, is there anything that you want to direct people to? Anything that you're doing you want people to see or plug anything at all?
No, no,
Okay,
no. I am retired in the sense that I'm no longer trying to sell anything. I mean, even
sure.
Dark Detective 3, if they buy it, that'd be great. But I'm not like,
Yeah,
I'm still writing because I like to write. It turns out writing is fun
excellent.
for me. So I write,
Good.
I write, I write stuff again that interests me that I think would, give me and other people an endorphin hit.
Yeah,
But I'm not actively trying to like find somebody to publish it.
sure.
It's just like if nobody publishes it, fine. I still got the endorphin hit myself. So.
All right, fair enough. Well, then we'll figure out down the road because I mean, with that Dark Detective 2, as you say, I've got quite a
Mm,
few questions for you about this one too, as well
okay.
as some of your other stories. So we'll put a
Oh,
pin in it and we'll
okay.
talk another time. So Steve, thanks so much for talking
You're
with me. I
welcome.
appreciate it.
Sure, no problem.